This is the Patriots Prayer Network, where truth matters.
Raise some Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.
Welcome to the Raising Cain Show. I'm Nate Cain, your host, and we're here to challenge the mainstream narrative and uncover the truth. Today, we're thrilled to have Chuck Wiese, a meteorologist trained at Oregon State University, also a retired Delta pilot of 25 years and longtime conservative activist. Chuck was one of the youngest TV weather forecasters in the Northwest and has spent years scrutinizing the claims surrounding climate change and exposing voter fraud in Oregon. A fierce advocate for the truth, Chuck's insights are not to be missed. So we're looking forward to digging into this topic for tonight, and I know you guys are going to be learning a lot of new things. So Chuck, thank you so much for joining the show.
Glad to be here, Nate.
So obviously, climate change, it seems that, there's a clear narrative behind it, but it wasn't always called that. I remember when it was called global warming, and then even before that, global cooling. And so, obviously somebody at least smart got in there and said, hey, we can't keep, changing it from, cooling and warming. So let's just call it climate change. And then that way, no matter what it does, we can just blame it on, human beings. So can you break down for us, maybe start with, what is the official climate change narrative?
Well, the official climate change narrative, if you want to call it that, is that human emissions of atmospheric carbon dioxide are causing the climate to warm. And of course, there's all the things you read in mainstream media that say this is a climate crisis. And if we don't do something to control our human emissions, we're going to warm the planet beyond 1.5 degrees Celsius above the mean temperature of the Earth, which is like 59 degrees Fahrenheit. And it will cause catastrophic melting of the ice caps, all these catastrophic things they talk about. The funny thing about all this, Nate, is they've been saying it for a long time. I mean, I was in the atmospheric science department at Oregon State University when all of this started. And back in the 70s, they were actually talking about CO2 causing global cooling. That was one of the things they were worried about way back then. And our department was taken over by a professor by the name of Lawrence Gates. He brought people up from Lawrence Livermore and UCLA to help him in his endeavors in the department. And one of the things that they did back in those days was they transformed the department into what was going to be a climate modeling institution. They were kind of pushing everything they did in atmospheric science aside. And that really depressed me as an undergraduate student at that time, because I wanted to keep the programs intact and learn as much as I could out of those, which I did. But they were in the process of transforming everything at that time. And Gates had called a special meeting with all the grad and undergrad students and basically said, we've kind of conquered the weather forecasting part of atmospheric science. What we want to do now is model the climate and be able to tell those interested what the climate of the Earth would look like, say, 50 or 100 years from now. Mm-hmm. And while that's a noble objective, who wouldn't want to do that? All of us in the department at the time, though, were kind of scratching our heads going, yeah, but we know what the problem with short-term weather forecast models are, and a climate model wouldn't be any different than that. And how are you going to get around all the mathematical and physical limitations to be able to do what you want to do? I didn't see
Right.
how they were going to do it, and I had no interest in it. And as it turns out, they went ahead and invented a climate model, but it's produced all kinds of erroneous results.
Well, and
And
on
and then
saying
they
that, you
started
know,
telling whoppers.
yep.
They started telling whoppers about what their skill level was. And then to make that even worse, they started manipulating the climate records to match their bad model output.
Hmm.
And the story never ended. And all of this came down to this horrendous flow of money into these universities to promote this
Right.
green climate change stuff. That's what kept it going. And unfortunately, you've had people that were willing to bend the truth with respect to model accuracy and what the real science had to say about this to keep that money coming into the universities. And before they came in and made these changes, Nate, the founding principles from atmospheric science, as they were all well established and taught at every major university, were that atmospheric CO2 has no power to change the climate. It's a secondary greenhouse gas. They inverted the truth on that and said, no, it's the main greenhouse gas. It is not. It's never been. And it has no power to do the things that they claim the models were forecasting it to do today. So there's been a complete inversion of the truth. It's really disgusting. I just have a hard time with this because there's been so many falsehoods promoted by mainstream legacy media about this, and they don't let go of it because of all the money that got injected. There's billions of dollars invested into converting things to this green energy.
Yeah.
And once that train left the station, you can't get people that are recipients of the money or somehow benefiting from this to tell the truth about it. It's really sad.
Yeah. You know, no disrespect to your profession of meteorology, but you know, I've always jokingly said that my knee is a better predictor of the weather than than the weatherman. And to think the level of arrogance to think that you're going to be able to predict what the weather's going to do, you know, 10 years from now, let alone 10 days from now, is just absurd.
Yeah, we know what the limitations of the models were and why they failed because in order to run the models, even short-term weather forecast models, you have to take the Earth and divide it up into little squares. And the calculations that you make to run the models with are based upon the area in those squares. And we've always known they're always too big to ever satisfy the equations within them, the limits of the equations. And so with time, they're going to leak energy, flow, and transformation, which means the solutions beyond but a few days will fall apart. We've had to live with this for years, and nobody's been able to go around it. But then when they invented a climate model, which is still a weather forecast model, it's got the same physics in it, but now they had to make the grids wider to maintain computational stability, which means they leak energy even faster. And so you can't expect to get reasonable solutions out of this. And the way they got around it was they said, okay, well, we kind of know we can't forecast the weather accurately with this model in space-time coordinates. So what we'll do is we'll treat it like a boundary value problem in mathematics where we let the model run randomly. The weather runs randomly in the model all around the Earth. But because the Earth is a sphere, somehow, even if we don't get the weather right from one place to the other, it'll average out over time and we'll still pull a rabbit out of the magic hat and get an answer 50 or 100 years from now. That's absurd. There have been papers done, about this since then. Pat Frank from Stanford University did one just a little over a year ago that demonstrated the error in the models doesn't just go away if you get one part of it wrong. The error accumulates, making things worse over time. And of course, that's what we always suspected. So they're running things and playing fast and loose with what their skill level is, which is it's just not there. You can't do it. These climate models are artifacts of science, the way a lot of us see it. And there's no way they've ever gotten around that. So, but yet that's the one thing they use to make these preposterous predictions with that have become public policy. And thank God we've got somebody in the White House now that's surrounding himself with good scientists that are going to correct a lot of this and get us back on the right track.
You pointed out the enormous amounts of money that have gone into this. There was the Climate Policy Initiative's 2023 report that came out. They indicated that climate financing flows must increase sixfold to $8.5 trillion annually by 2030 to keep global temperature rise within 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is so ridiculous. It's clear just by that report alone that this is about money. That's what this is about. They see this as an opportunity to bilk trillions of dollars out of the taxpayers and directly into their pockets.
I agree 100% with that, because the models are not only flawed, and time has proven that the results we got out of them are wrong. And most of us knew they were probably going to be wrong a long time ago. But when you put all this investment into it, I think there's even a darker motive behind them wanting to do a lot of this. And what I see is it gives government agencies, as you grow them as part of this whole green scam, it gives them more and more power to control the behavior of the individual by pricing the cost of energy, and then even regulating how much of it you can use. You know, what these people wanted to do with the electric grid is preposterous. They're setting Oregon and California. In fact, California is already feeling it, because they have created, with this green energy, the lack of the ability of the state to meet energy load demands during peak times. And so there's brownouts and blackouts when they need to use a lot of power. And because Oregon is following in those same footsteps, if we don't change course, we're going to be faced with the same thing. Well, when you think about that, and think about how they're putting the electric grids in peril because of this stupid idea. When you think about that, and let's say they can continue to do it, and then we start getting the brownout blackout stuff. Well, what's going to be their answer from that? The answer will be, let's say, because they want to electrify the auto industry too. They want everybody to have electric cars. Well, when you create a power shortage due to that, the next thing they'll do is they'll start saying what days you can drive your car and what days you can't. They've already got these thermostats. They did it in Colorado, where if you're using too much power to cool your house down, they remotely control your thermostat and tell you got to set it at 80 when it's 100 degrees outside. I mean, it's a control thing. And they're using the control mechanisms in addition to this outrageous amount of money it's costing to do this. I mean, it's the most absurd thing if you just reason with yourself a little bit and take a look at what's happening around you. And we're already seeing it. Yeah.
Well, this issue with the cars is very interesting. There is I think it's Representative Massey. He drives a Tesla, but he's got a sticker on the back of it that says "powered by coal," and that people don't understand that when they look at that, but they don't realize, they don't understand it. The fact is that electric cars are pulling power from the grid, and power from the grid is created not by windmills and not by solar panels. I think that produces like less than 1% or something like that, or maybe a little over 1%, but it's a very, very small fraction of the electricity that is produced on the grid. Most of it's produced through the burning of fossil fuels. And the fact that these guys, they know this, and yet they're pushing this whole idea about how, we're going to save the world by reducing carbon footprints, but we want everybody to drive electric cars, which need electricity from fossil fuel burning plants. So it really is ridiculous. It's disingenuous, what they are pushing, because they know the truth, but they push a narrative that is a complete lie. I was looking at just some numbers here. The number of vehicles worldwide, about 1.45 billion vehicles worldwide. And, just kind of figuring out some averages and all of that. The bottom line is the approximate electricity that would be needed, per year just for cars would be approximately 29,000 terawatt hours per year. And it's absolutely unfathomable the amount of electricity that would be needed for this. So this push to try to eliminate, gasoline powered vehicles, it tells me something. They know this information. So why would they push this? Because they want people to be without freedom and independence. because only the elites, only the rich will be able to actually have these kinds of, electric vehicles and things like that. And what will happen is majority of the population won't be able to even own a vehicle. They'll be stuck having to live in these, 15-minute cities or whatever the hell they call them, where they, have to take mass transit or, be within walking distance of their job. And, while that's great for some people and that, if they want to live that way, that's fine by them. I prefer to live out in the country. I don't want to live in the city and, living right on top of my neighbors.
Well, I would agree with that. And here's another thing for the viewers to digest. You just talked about how absurd the whole idea is, and you're right, because they're going to load the electric grid to the point where it's going to fail. Unless you come up with sources of power like nuclear, which we're going to need in the future because power demand is going to go up. But these green renewables cannot provide the load demand that's going to be necessary to keep the grid up and running. But here's the really ridiculous thing when you take a look at the whole idea of what they're doing. They claim, and this is a fictitious and arbitrary number, that in order to get a safe climate, now this is James Hansen who said this, who is a climate alarmist. He said you got to get atmospheric CO2 back to 350 parts per million by volume. Well, it's about 429 right now. And he said that's what defines a safe climate. There's no proof of that whatsoever. I've asked to see, how did you calculate that? How do you determine what a safe climate is? There's no number that you can come up with that demonstrates this. It's strictly fictitious and arbitrary, and this is pounded out into the media. So that's out there. How are you ever going to get back to that? Then take a look at what you're actually saving. Let's just say, for example, all of this green stuff they're talking about was wildly successful, like the environmentalists are hoping that it would be. Let's say that we went all green and eliminated our carbon emissions across the United States. Well, I did a calculation of that, and here in Oregon, because they're trying to shove a green energy program, a climate protection program down our throats in this state. If you eliminated all of Oregon's 60 million metric tons of CO2 per year, it would be on a global scale 0.156% of global emissions. That's 15.61% of the global emissions. It wouldn't even make a dent. That's if you could wipe it all out, which is scientifically impossible. And if you did that across all 50 states, let's say that they were wildly successful. They wiped out all the carbon emissions of all 50 states. That's 12.6% of global emissions, which still would not stop the continued growth of atmospheric CO2. And I submit you'd be committing a human genocide to ever try something so stupidly foolish as that. But yet that's the reality of what these people are doing. And so when you look at that and you look at the fact that it makes absolutely no sense, you can't accomplish any of these so-called goals that they set for themselves to get atmospheric CO2 back to 350 parts per million, the whole thing collapses. And anybody with common sense would have to realize there must be something terribly wrong with the climate sensitivities built into these failed models. And there certainly is. They don't control the climate. So you just think about that and you realize right away, you people are wasting our time and billions, if not trillions of dollars trying this stupid stuff that's never going to work. It's never going to make an iota of difference to atmospheric CO2 levels or the climate. And that's all you need to know in order to say, okay, President Trump, and he knows, time to scrap all of this stuff. And he knows he's going to scrap it. It needs to be scrapped and it needs to be stopped. And all this outrageous money going to continue to perpetrate the lies must be cut off. It's the only way you're going to get these people to go away, because they're very good at lying. And they've got so many outlets in the media that's fueled by these billions of dollars that the government keeps giving it every year. And that's what you got to do. You got to shut it down just with these simple facts that are scientifically indisputable.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think that when we are looking at what's happening on the global level, China in 2023, they produced 11,902.5 million metric tons of CO2 versus the United States, 4,911.39. So they more than double, the CO2 production that we have.
Right.
And it leads me to believe that all of this push it is a anti-human agenda, number one. It's even an anti-plant agenda, because at the end of the day, plants need carbon dioxide to survive. And they,
Yes,
in
they do.
turn, produce the oxygen that we breathe. It is a self-balancing system. So this nonsense of, that we're going to produce too much CO2, it doesn't make any sense, because the more CO2, the more, they even call it greenhouse gas, which is just crazy, because that means you're going to have more greenery, which is going to absorb and sequester that CO2 and produce oxygen in return. I've got to cut to a commercial break, but folks, I want you to stick with us, because conversation is going to get more interesting. And when we come back, I'm going to talk about what Donald Trump is already doing to save our world from global warming. So we will be right back after a short message.
It says, I woke up this morning and looked out the door to a country I don't recognize. They put masks on our face to hide our pain, and there's no fire in most people's eyes. And it's still true today. It's still true today that they've tried to destroy the American spirit. And in some instances, they've done a dadgum good job. But in other instances, they have lit an inferno in some people. And we right now are gathering some of those people that are on freaking fire to save this country.
Welcome back to the Raising Cain show. And we've been talking with Chuck Wiese about the issue of climate change, really the farce of climate change. And before we went to break, I made a kind of tongue-in-cheek comment about Donald Trump, our president, saving the world from global warming. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that here in a minute. But before I do, folks, the video that you just watched is from a good friend of mine, Glenn Baker. He's an American patriot. He is a veteran. He is a combat veteran. He's also somebody he's a country singer, but he's also somebody that has been through just some of the most egregious violations of his rights. And the documentary that he put forward is just an incredible documentary. It has a lot of great people in it, including myself. It tells my story about what happened to me as a FBI whistleblower. But we also have other people in there like Tig Teagan, the Benghazi whistleblower and survivor. And we also have some other people in there talking about January 6th and some of the things that went on there. There's been so much just unbelievable incarceration of American citizens illegally for political purposes, and abuse of whistleblowers and things like that. So we talk about a lot of that in there, but it doesn't just talk about it from a negative perspective. It's a very, I think, heartwarming and uplifting video and documentary, and I would just recommend people to go and check it out. 50% of the proceeds are going to go to help put a veteran who can no longer walk into an exoskeleton so he can walk again. And I can't think of, a better way to spend our money. It's I think $10.99 to rent the film, and you can go and watch it at finishthisfight.us/Cain. And it's streaming across the bottom there, in case you forget, by the end of the show. So, Chuck, before we went to break, I made this comment. Donald Trump has saved our country from global warming, and I'm going to pull up something here. Friend of mine here, fellow West Virginian, Derek Evans, he posted this video. We are seeing snow in Florida.
Yeah, exactly.
In Florida and on the Gulf Coast, in Louisiana. I mean, it's all over the place, and it's just hilarious. But I love this comment that he posts there. He's only been in office for a couple of days, already saved the world from global warming. It's pretty hilarious.
Yeah, I like that. I like it too. And there's scientific ramifications to that because, one of the theories, one of the main theories of this CO2 induced climate change nonsense is the fact that if it were true, the high latitudes where it's dry, which are the Arctic and Antarctic, would be the first to experience the massive effects of a warming climate if CO2 were causing it. And the warming rate there would be several times over what it would be in the rest of the latitude lines going down to the equator. Well, if that were true, you wouldn't be able to get weather patterns like this that generate themselves, because what causes, when you watch TV weather, you see the TV weather guys, they show the weather maps where the jet stream is looping all around. It goes way up north and way down south. It does this at certain times of the year more than others, and we find that that's true in the winter. And the whole reason why you see those big dips in the jet stream is because of the temperature disparity from the tropics to the poles. It gets very cold up north in the wintertime, and the colder it gets, the more temperature disparity, the more potential energy is liberated to develop these storms, and the jet stream starts looping around to cause the exchange of warm and cold between the tropics and the poles. Well, if it's warming rapidly in the poles and the temperature disparity is decreasing, which according to their theory would have to be taking place, you wouldn't see as big a dips in the jet stream. You wouldn't see this Arctic air having the sort of intensity that it does, dipping all the way down to the Gulf Coast states and into Florida, and then combining with low pressure that took off to the east and brought record snows to that part of the country over the last few days. And I might add, I looked at the records, and New Orleans broke a record, and I think Houston and New Orleans both broke records snowfall records that go back over 100 years. Now, if CO2, I know CO2 100 years ago was around 300 parts per million. Today it's at 427, yet we're getting even worse snowstorms than we did back 100 years ago when CO2 was much less. So it's obvious it's not having this effect on temperature, and there are many other examples I could give to show that that's true. It's water vapor clouds in the hydrological cycle that regulate the Earth's infrared radiation budget from the energy that comes in from the sun. It's not CO2. CO2 is dwarfed by the effect of all these other greenhouse gases, which precipitate out of the atmosphere and create a very regulating type situation with the Earth's climate. So CO2 is kind of along for the ride, and what these guys have said with their failed modeling and their claims it's the main greenhouse gas is they're saying it's the tail that wags the dog rather than the dog that wags the tail. That's putting it in a simplistic form, but that's basically their philosophy. And I submit to you that if that were true, you wouldn't be seeing these snowstorms that we just got seeing that you made fun of. It would be impossible for the cold air to penetrate to that far south of a latitude, and it would be impossible to generate the snow that they got going there if the climate was warming due to CO2. You just don't see those patterns, and yet we're seeing them all the time. They're repetitive.
Right. And I think the issue that to me is the one that is the most contentious in this whole climate change debate. It's not about whether or not climate change is happening. Of course, climate change is happening. It happens all the time. We see it every year with the 4 seasons. But you also see solar maximums and solar minimums, over hundreds of years. And then there's even other things that happen that can impact the weather. I think the real issue, between what becomes science and what becomes science fiction is this notion that that man-made industrialization essentially has caused, this massive warming of the planet and all of this nonsense. One of the things that was very compelling to me when I first started looking into this issue was something called the mini ice age, which occurred approximately between 1300s to 1850s. And it was in the 17th and early 18th century. You had global temperatures dropped by about 0.6 to 1.2 Celsius on average. And the causes were due to a number of things, but you had solar activity that had a huge, part in it, something called the Maunder minimum. When
Maunder and Dalton both. There were two of them, actually. Maunder and Dalton both. Dalton would happen a little later.
Yep. So you had sunspot activity that was significantly reduced, but there was also volcanic eruptions.
Krakatoa.
That's right. And Mount Tambora in 1815.
Tambora and Krakatoa, exactly.
Yep. So the amount of greenhouse gases that were produced by those volcanic eruptions were so massive, in such a short period of time, that I think it had, huge disruptions in the global climate and atmosphere, way more than anything that we do with, our carbon emissions. But it seems like these guys that are pushing this narrative, like they just discount that, and they don't even take that into consideration, that you have all kinds of natural sources of CO2 emission, or not just CO2, but greenhouse gases, some that are way more, impactful than carbon dioxide, for example. So how do they justify this?
Well, I don't think that they can. I mean, one thing that your viewers would appreciate too is the fact that they talk about human emissions of CO2, and when you calculate the fuels that are burned, all the fossil fuels from natural gas, gasoline, you name it, they calculate it. It turns out that if you do this worldwide, we emit about 37 to 39 billion metric tons of CO2 per year. That's human emissions. Mm-hmm. But what they don't talk about is, what does nature emit in a year's worth of carbon exchange between the land and the oceans and the atmosphere? If you look at what that is yearly, it's up to 800 billion metric tons of CO2 that's exchanged yearly, that goes into the atmosphere and comes back out. It's over 20 human emissions. The natural emissions are over 20 times greater than what human emissions are on a yearly basis. But the way they tried to get around saying, well, it doesn't make any difference because human emissions are what causes 100% of the increase, is that they have always assumed, because of looking at ice core records, that the CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere that's there by nature, this annual carbon cycle, stays constant. It never changes. So anything over that is solely the result of human emissions. That is false.
Yeah.
It can't be true, because we know that natural emissions of CO2 from nature are dependent upon the temperature, both emission and absorption. Absorption in the high oceans, emission in the tropics, tropical oceans, and what comes out of the land. That is temperature sensitive. And we have had some warming since the last little ice age that you were just talking about. Since the satellite records began, we've had about 0.5 degree Celsius of warming since 1979. But we know what caused that. I wrote about it, and other people have written about it too. It was actually a slight decrease in the Earth's albedo, which is the reflectivity of solar radiation as it tries to get to the Earth. The clouds and anything of bright color reflects that energy back. And if you decrease that reflectivity, more radiation gets to the ground, and it can cause warming. Solar radiation has 4 times the potency of the Earth's infrared signal that comes off the ground. So it definitely controls everything. And the slightest changes can cause changes in the global temperature. Mm-hmm. And so the natural emissions of CO2 have been going up. It is foolish to think that this 800 billion metric tons just keeps rolling around like a hamster wheel and never changes. If you warm the Earth you're going to increase emission and decrease absorption, and you're going to put more CO2 in. So to say that everything since the start of the Industrial Revolution was due to humans is false. Dr. Edwin Berry, that I know very well, and if your viewers want to learn more about this, go to edberry.com. Ed is a theoretical physicist. I'm very good friends with him. My work is published on his site, and so is his. He's the first guy that came along and actually invented a carbon model, a simple carbon model, which demonstrates why human emissions are not 100% responsible for what's in the atmosphere since the start of the Industrial Revolution. And this throws a lot of water on this whole concept. I mean, the more you look into this and the more you see the errors there, and calling carbon dioxide the main greenhouse gas, which it's not, the more you look into all this and see the falsehoods, the more the evidence piles against it. And the whole thing, as far as I'm concerned, has fallen apart. It's complete BS, and it needs to stop. They need to stop with this and get us back on the right track, as we've wasted already billions of dollars on it. And it's going to get us nowhere. It's going to solve nothing. I was asked Gavin Newsom. Newsom has been prolific in getting California to convert to all this green energy. Look at all the money he spent on that. And look at all the stupid things that have happened. Their cities are burning down because they won't clean up the forests. They got to protect wildlife species, and so they don't clean anything up there. And they've done all this green energy conversion. Well, I asked him, so how's the CO2 level treating you down there, Gavin? Is it gone down any since you started all this? It hasn't. It's accelerating upward, and it's because the climate has warmed some, and it's because human emissions didn't go down either. They keep establishing a new balance level as you emit more, but it's only a fraction of what nature does. But it's not going down. That's the point. And it's not controlling the climate either. So look at all the effort they put into this down in California, and look where it got them. You have such incompetence in all of this. It's just unbelievable. I mean, Nate, it makes you want to pull your hair out. And I wish I could get involved in straightening it out. But Trump has got the right scientists he's going to bring in that he already knows about this. He's been briefed about a lot of it. And hopefully there'll be some changes. I understand he's going to California tomorrow to talk maybe with Gavin Newsom about the terrible fire disasters down there. And then they blame that on climate change when it's forest mismanagement and their green policies that caused it. The weather and the climate had nothing to do with it. Absolutely nothing.
I'm glad that you brought up the albedo effect, because, when we talk about man-made climate change, there is something that that human beings have been doing, at least recently. And I want to bring something up here, because many of you will be familiar with, having seen it across your skies. You've heard one of the first people I ever heard talking about it was Alex Jones, talking about chemtrails on InfoWars. And, everybody called him a tinfoil hat, conspiracy theorist, and said, oh no, those are contrails. Those are condensation trails from planes flying over. Now, you were a pilot. Do you know of condensation trails that can stick around all day long up in the sky?
Well, it depends on the humidity and the atmospheric profile at the time the jets are flying. There are days when you can fly a jet at 30,000 feet and you're not emitting a contrail because the air is so dry. But if the relative humidity at the altitude you're flying is high, then you can get immediate condensation of the water vapor that comes out of the jet engines. To my knowledge, when I was flying in the years I did at Delta and elsewhere, we never heard of chemtrails or things that our airliners were emitting that were causing any of this. It's most of it's, not all of it, is just the way the atmosphere behaves when you have jet exhaust going into it. Now, that doesn't mean that people haven't tried weather modification, but I'm not aware of anything that's going on right now that would explain this, other than it's just the normal crisscross pattern of jet traffic.
Well, I'll share something that I know about. For years, I could never talk about it because I've worked in government with clearances, and and I've read the reports. There are, certain reports on new technological advancements and things like that. This, especially where you see like a grid-like pattern, and it's like almost like looks like a checkerboard. I've seen this where I was living in Maryland at the time, and I walk outside. It's a beautiful, clear day, sunny, blue sky, and then all of a sudden you start seeing, these crisscross patterns, like a grid, and within maybe a couple of hours, the whole sky is overcast. It's like these chemtrails, end up spreading out. And there's been other pictures that have been released and that show, some planes. Most of these are military planes that are spraying things in the sky. But there's been a lot of information that has been released. Bill Gates has been a big funder of this, spraying silver oxide into the in the atmosphere in order to create a reflective surface to reflect back the sun's rays up into space in order to reduce global warming. And I mean, these kinds of experiments, for one, we don't know what these chemicals that they're spraying into the sky, what they do to us. We don't know what the long-term effects are on the ecosystem. And but they're, without a doubt, they have been doing these types of experiments for some time. I am not one of these people who immediately looks at our government, for doing experiments and says, "Oh, this is evil and they're just trying to kill us." There's a lot of people that do say that. I do think that there are some people who are anti-human, especially these globalists, and I do think that they want to reduce the population. But I don't think that this is their primary method of doing it. What I see going on here is I see people making a lot of money off of getting funded research to do experiments. However, I can tell you, we're not the only ones doing it. Our enemies are doing it. We've got China. You've got, in fact, there was a report that was released, I think, out of, what was the name of that? The Economist. This was several years ago, that there were documents that got leaked from the CCP, and they were doing weather modification experimentation. And so, of course, if our enemies are doing it, we've got to do it too. But what makes me nervous about these types of experiments is it's kind of like nuclear weapons. If everybody is if our enemies develop nuclear weapons, we have to develop them. If they test them, we have to test them. It becomes a, kind of a mutually assured destruction. And the goal is that nobody will use them. But I feel like we're doing this with these types of experiments, in weather modification. And I have wondered if some of the experiments in weather modification have had an impact on extreme weather conditions and things like that. I've seen, like I said, I've seen with my own eyes, nobody's going to convince me otherwise, where it was a beautiful blue sky. And by midday, after all of these grid patterns were flown over the sky, these lines, dissipated and spread out and made a complete, overcast cloud cover, over the, and turned it into a gray, dull day. And I do think about things like this, and not just this, but other types of experiments that can have massive impacts on a lot of people. Things like the gain of function testing and things like that we've done, that they say is for purposes of developing better vaccines, when in fact it seems like it's just another name for biological weapons testing. And I have to think that if there's not more transparency with these types of initiatives, I do think that there needs to be transparency. If it has the potential to affect our environment, we need to know, and we should have a say in it. This is a democratic, republic. We elect people. They take our money to fund these types of things, and it shouldn't be being done without our consent. What do you know about, or do you know about any type of weather modification experiments and stuff like that going on?
Well, I know that there were modification experiments that were done in the past because there's always been an interest by people in science as to whether we could ever control any aspect of the weather. Cloud seeding was one of the first things that they did a long time ago, but cloud seeding experiments failed. In fact, Dr. Berry, the guy that I know very well, part of his graduate work was involved in doing some of this stuff. And what they found out was that the idea of cloud seeding is to take silver iodide and put it into supercooled water droplets in clouds that are not precipitating, but to see if you could get precipitation to be induced by creating more nuclei to grow ice crystals with, which the silver iodide is supposed to do. And they found that only under special conditions could there be minor success with some of this. In general, everything failed, and a lot of the experiments were just abandoned for that very reason.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that people later on, like Bill Gates with the billions of dollars he has, or others, wouldn't take an interest in this, because Bill Gates is a climate fanatic. The guy has been misled so terribly. He may be a computer genius, but he's foolishly fallen into this, believing that maybe some of the things he could spend his money on would make a difference to cool the climate off. You know, they talked about putting mirrors in space, and maybe there are some of the maybe there is some spraying going on by government contract. I can tell you for sure that no commercial aircraft is doing it, because we would have known flying these airplanes if anything like that was going on. But if there's military application, I can't speak to that because I'm not in the military, so I don't know. But I can tell you that any attempts to regulate the climate with the technology that we have are going to fail, and they're going to fail massively. Now, any good scientist would tell somebody like Bill Gates that, but I don't know if they have. I don't know if he's gotten the message. You know, I did see online of a lot of rumors going around that we were using radars to steer hurricanes. I know that this became a big deal over the summer because of all the damage that I think it was Hurricane Helene did to the Carolinas when it moved north and then took a right turn and went out to into the Carolinas before exiting over the sea. And I think when you get all excited about this and you have things that you try to put together to say, oh, here's proof of this and this and this, you're not proving anything. I mean, what I did after I heard this was I thought, well, I was curious myself. So I did a basic calculation, just took an average hurricane, like now even weaker than Helene. And I did a simple calculation. I wanted to know how much energy could a hurricane like this, like just an average strength one, do? How much energy could it release instantaneously compared to the electrical energy across the United States? So I took a hurricane of average size, 115 mile an hour wind, and 5 inches of rain an hour. And I did all the numbers. I crunched it out and converted that energy to equivalent electrical energy. And what I got was, for an average hurricane, and this is like just 200 miles in diameter, is that something with those parameters would generate 7,282.8 trillion watts of power. That's unbelievably large. And then you take a look at what's the power generation, instantaneous power generation you could get across the entire United States in 1 second if all the generating capacities were operating at maximum capacity. And that's 1.3 trillion watts. So nature, an average hurricane, is able to produce an equivalent amount of energy that's 5,600 times over what our entire electric grid could produce in 1 second. So when you take a look at things like that, I don't think there's a very big appreciation for just how much energy is involved in weather systems like this and what it would take to overpower them. So these rumors that were going around that we're steering hurricanes and blah, 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 that is impossible.
I would agree with you. I think that even with the cloud seeding and the stuff like that, I think that these experiments that they're doing, I don't like the fact that they're doing these experiments without the public knowing what exactly is being sprayed into the atmosphere and without knowing how it may be impacting our environment. But I do believe that the biggest downside to geoengineering is that, as far as I know, they've never been able to control it. And most of the experiments, at least as of late, I think have been related to trying to figure out how they can control it. I do think there is some evidence that they've tried to use radar and things like that, but I agree. I don't think that there's enough power generated to be able to actually do that. And but again, there's a reason why people are making these coming up with these conclusions, or they're coming up with these theories and posting them online. And that is because, like no other time in history, I think there is such a great distrust, of the government. I mean, I
Yes.
never in my wildest dreams would have ever thought that I would ever be debating with somebody about, whether the earth was a globe or whether it was flat. And yet
Yeah.
I see more and more flat earth, theories being put out there by people. And I have every reason to believe that the earth is a globe. I've seen things that I can't even talk about, in my work, related to satellites and stuff like that. There's just no doubt about it in my mind. But for the person who has zero trust in the government, who believes that the government has done nothing but lie to them at every chance that they've had, which they're not wrong. It's easy to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. And so I do think that we have to look at things critically. And I think one of the ways that we could improve things, and I hope that Donald Trump is going to do that. President Trump, in fact, today announced that he's declassifying the rest of the JFK files, the RFK files, and the MLK Jr. files. I think that's a good step in the right direction. We need to know, we need to see more disclosure, we need to see more transparency, and we need to know what the heck our government has been up to. And I think in revealing those things and in creating more transparency, I think it will build trust, and hopefully, we will get back to sanity, and being able to have discussions and not having to defend, the concept of the earth being a globe. So we're definitely living in different times.
Yes, we are. And I would agree that if the government is doing things behind our back, that we need to know about it because, like I said, Bill Gates is extremely ignorant about climate. He's been misled. And when you got somebody with that kind of money that's misled, who actually believes there's a climate crisis and we need to do something about it, they're grasping for straws when they're out there saying, well, maybe we could fly or put some chemicals in the atmosphere that would reflect sunlight, blah, 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 blah. If they are in fact doing that, if somebody's doing it, we need to know about it. We have a right to know about it because it could cause environmental damage. And the hell of it is, you're not going to get anything in exchange for the experiments. They're going to fail. And I'll predict that. And we'll bet money on it right now. There's no way you're going to change the Earth's climate with all of this foolishness, but you may end up damaging the environment from trying if they're using chemicals of any kind. And like I said, I don't know that they are. I have no direct knowledge of this, but there are people suspicious of it. And given the fact that the government has lied, as you say, they lie about so many things, who's to say they're not trying it? I mean, I think you've got some really nutty people that have fallen for this climate change nonsense, who believe in a climate crisis, and they think maybe doing something like this would make a difference. And we don't want any argument from real scientists, so we're going to do it behind their back. And because we know what's best for them. I mean, that's been the attitude of these people for a long time. We know better than you, so we're just not going to tell you, and you're just going to have to put up with whatever it is we're going to do. And that's not right. If they are doing it, we need to know about it. We need to know. And hopefully President Trump will shed some light on this with the things he's doing.
I've got to cut to another commercial break, but when we come back, I want to ask you about something else. You've been a pilot for your entire career, and you've had, I'm sure you've spent a lot of time in the air, and we've seen all kinds of interesting things been popping up in the news in regards to drones and, and UFOs, or what do they call them now? UAPs and whatever. But I'd like to get your thoughts on that and your opinion on that. So folks, stick with us. So as soon as we get back from the break, we're going to talk about that for a minute.
Increasing expenses have caused us all a lot of pressure these days, and it's affecting even the wealthiest of people. Most have lost their sense of security, stability, and even hope for a strong financial future. The game plan of everyone in your cell phone has likely been disrupted or even hardcore stopped, and most are looking for a creative solution to regain financial momentum. Oftentimes, life's best solutions are the simplest. But first, a question. What is something most people think they should own but don't? Crypto, fine art, real estate? Nope. We are talking about real money. The kind kings and queens fought for and large institutions today buy in mass. We're talking about gold and silver, assets that provide confidence in tough financial situations. So the question is, do you own any? If you don't, you're not alone. Most people aren't maximizing the power of precious metals because it's just been too complicated. And even though they see advertisements about gold and silver daily, they don't really know who to trust. That is, until now. The bottom line is that buying gold and silver doesn't have to be complicated or scary. There's a simple, better way to accumulate assets and create financial peace, headache-free. And this very minute, a new community of average people are seeing above average results to the tune of tens of millions in assets over the last few years. This system is tested, it's simple, and it's not an experiment. To date, it's helped more than 80,000 people bring hope back into their lives. It's invitation only, and right now, this new community has accepted a challenge to give away as much free gold this year as possible. Curious? Learn how to get your free gold today. Check out the next step to get the details.
Welcome back to the Raising Cain show. We've been talking about climate change and the climate change farce, but we've also been getting into some other topics too. And I appreciate our guest, Chuck Wiese, that we had on the show. And Chuck, you've got a long, distinguished career as a Delta pilot. Can you, in all of your time, you know, we've seen all of this stuff that's been on the news talking about drones in the skies. There's even been some video footage, supposedly from commercial airliners, people videoing things outside their window that are really, just to be honest with you, hard to describe. I'm kind of, on this subject matter, I kind of am neutral. There's certainly, I do know that there are UAPs, things that are unexplained, and things that our government doesn't even know what they are. I also know that there are a lot of experimental aircraft and drones and things like that we've, developed. But I don't know what to make of this because for the first time in my life, I'm seeing, like people who are, ex-military and stuff like that coming out and disclosing things that have never before, been publicly disclosed in any kind of major way. And so I'm curious, as a pilot, have you seen any of those types of things and in your experience? And, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, in my career and all the flying that I've done, I have never seen any of these things from a commercial jetliner or a private airplane that I've flown. I've never seen anything like this. But I know, and I'm aware of the fact that so there's been military reports of encounters like this and that sort of thing. So there's some credibility to it. But what really fascinates me is if in fact they're out there. If in fact these things are what a lot of people think that they might be, I'm completely baffled by how these crafts, based upon the military's explanation as to the maneuvering they saw the crafts do, how they're able to defy the laws of physics and gravitation of the Earth and the gravitational forces the craft would generate itself.
G-forces,
G-forces from the maneuvering that it's doing. I mean, based upon the speeds they calculated and the amount of maneuvering that the craft actually did, the G-forces would be enough in those things that have been documented by military to crush a human being that was in such a vessel and crush the ship. I mean, it would just basically be flattened like a pancake from the G-force.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't, and they do what they do. So it makes me wonder, okay, are these things of the same physical dimension that we're in, or is it something else? that can allow it to defy our laws of gravitation, like it's apparently able to do, as they've seen. And I don't know. I don't have any good answer to that. I just don't.
I agree
But
with
it
you.
is fascinating to read the reports, but I have no explanation.
I think you're onto something with that. I do think that there's for the things that are not man-made and not explainable, I think that there's probably could be some sort of interdimensional type of device. I am a Christian and hold to biblical views, and I look at stories in like the book of Ezekiel and talking about angels and demons and what sound to me like UFOs that he's describing in Ezekiel chapter 1. So I think that it's very possible that there's some sort of spiritual aspect to these things as well. One thing that I do find interesting, there was a report I remember a few years back. I think it was at Chicago O'Hare Airport. Do you remember this? Where there was a craft or an orb, or I think it was just an orb that was out on the runway, and it was particularly foggy. And this thing, there was multiple people that saw it. It made the news, but it was sitting out there, basically blocking planes from being able to take off. And then eventually this thing just shot straight up into the sky, and they got it on film because they had the like I said, the news media got it on film after this thing shot through the sky. It left this circular hole all the way straight up through the clouds and through the fog, which was just really interesting. And it moved way too quick, for some, something that a human being was in flying or something. Do you remember hearing about that?
That's one that escaped me. No, I'm sorry, I don't. I don't remember reading anything about that.
Yeah.
I'd like to, just to see what's been said about it. Because
I was curious if you had anybody that you knew maybe that said, had
never
flown
heard
in
any,
at that time.
Never heard any Delta or Northwest guys talk about it. No, not that I know of. And we flew in and out of there all the time, but I never heard from any of the guys about it. So. And I don't know why that is. I just didn't. They might have talked about it, but I wasn't in part of any of those conversations. It was just never brought up if guys were talking about it, at least not to me.
Well, I want to wrap things up here, but I want to kind of ask you kind of a question to end the show on. We know there's so much evidence that the climate change narrative is a lie, that it is, basically it is propaganda to push a certain narrative, likely for, money and power. Why do you think so many governments and so many people in the mainstream media have signed on to this lie? I mean, I'm not particularly I'm not a rocket scientist, but I can even look at this and what they're saying, and it does not make sense. It doesn't add up. The biggest thing is it's like, look, we've had major shifts in our climate, including freezing periods and warming periods, long before man ever industrialized. And now you're going to tell me that all of a sudden climate change is being caused by industrialization? That doesn't add up. So there are, to me, far more good arguments against anthropogenic climate change than there are for it. And yet governments continue to sign on to Paris, Accords, and you've got and these things are very these policies are so destructive to our economy. They are destructive to our ability to defend ourselves from our enemies. Like, you got China doesn't seem to care at all about how much carbon they're producing. Yet we're going to go ahead and hamstring ourselves and, tie our, both of our hands behind our backs, to meet some arbitrary number that some group of unelected people have decided that we have to meet. What is driving this, in your opinion?
Well, I see the desire, and by that I mean, if you want to know where I'm coming from, look to the WEF and Klaus Schwab all these billionaires that gather at Davos every year and what their objectives are. I mean, Klaus Schwab told us basically that in the future, he sees us owning nothing and we'll be happy. And that to me means he wants to bankrupt everybody and control you. And when you take a look at the amount of money it's costing the United States to invest in this crap, as well as the rest of the world, and then you take a look at the fact that we're 35 or $36 trillion in debt, and it's accelerating rapidly. What I see these people wanting to do, because that makes no sense to me either. Why would anybody in our elected offices allow this sort of deficit spending to go on if there wasn't an ulterior motive that was very bad for the citizens? And by that, I mean, I think the larger objective by the WEF and all these other countries is to, the United States is the only nation in the world that's getting in the way of these globalists. They would love to bankrupt our dollar. I think that's part of what's behind this. And if they can bankrupt the dollar and ruin it to where it's no longer the world's reserve currency, I think their motive is they would love to take the United States and put us into some sort of a world economic order where we get the dollar replaced by the European Union's currency or something that represents a global currency to where and if that happens, of course, we lose our sovereignty as a nation, and we're basically tied into Europe and the rest of the world. I think they envision being able to eventually do this, and I'm hoping we can stop it, because it makes no sense to me why we're this far in debt and nobody seems to want to do anything about it. It's like, oh, well, you got a ticking time bomb here and we're just going to keep ignoring it. We're going to keep piling on. What the Biden administration did in the last 4 years in spending is just ridiculous. I mean, they didn't care. They were piling on and piling on and piling on, sending money overseas to this ridiculous Ukraine-Russian war while we're not taking care of our own citizens and things that are needed in this country. You see this sorts of behavior. To me, it just all means their objective is to bankrupt the dollar, ruin it, and force us into some sort of a new economic world order. And that way they can control us. You know, imagine this. If you have $100,000 in the bank that you've saved all your life and you lose the reserve currency of the dollar, you go to a reserve, a new currency, like say that controls the world, you on a swap to that might be given 10 or 5% of what was in your bank account before the swap. So that's how they pay for the debt. They clean it all out and clean the balance sheets by saying that's what we're going to do. But the end result is you are now poor. You had money, but now you don't have very much money. And the dirty players will transfer out of the dollar before it ever happens. The people controlling all of this. Yeah. And that's what I think it's all about personally. And thank God Donald Trump is in office, because he's the only guy that can stop this if it's going to be stopped. And by God, I hope he can do it.
If Biden had remained in office, or if Kamala had won, I believe we would already be that would already be happening. They would
it would
making that move. Question. There was a back in November, there was a story that broke where Fed Chair Jerome Powell was asked, I think in an interview, that if Donald Trump asked him to resign, if he would resign, and he said no. And I think that this is part of the problem, is that our government doesn't control our monetary policy anymore. We gave that over to the Federal Reserve, which is actually a private corporation. It's not even federal is a misnomer, because it's not a government agency. I do see a problem coming that I do think that Trump's going to have to deal with, and it's going to be difficult. And that is our debt. And the fact that you've got countries like Saudi Arabia that have started allowing, Russia and China to buy oil with their currency instead of the U.S. dollar, which means, that it impacts that very thing that you were just talking about whether or not, we remain the world's reserve currency. If it were ever to stop being the world's reserve currency, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but it takes time, a process for that to happen. The consequences economically for us would be devastating, because I think it's something like 80% of all U.S. dollars in circulation are outside of this country.
Yes, they are.
And so if those were all to return, it would devalue our dollar and make it worthless overnight.
Yes, you'd have hyperinflation.
Yep, absolutely. So I do think that Trump's on the. I think he's so. So a lot of people are afraid of Trump's tariffs, and they don't like that. I get it. I used to be one of those that was completely opposed to tariffs, but I understand. I believe why he's doing it, and that is that we have to rebuild our industrial base here in the United States, our manufacturing here in the United States, for the inevitability of something happening. We're not going to be if we have everything we need here in the United States, we're making it here, we're building it here, our base materials are coming from here, then something, causing the if we have some sort of event that takes the US dollar and makes it no longer the reserve currency, we will not be as impacted by hyperinflation. But if we are buying stuff from other countries and the dollar falls relative to some other currency that we have to buy materials from, or we have to buy our goods from, then we will feel it. We will feel it immediately. And so these actions that Trump is making to basically say, look, you can do what you want. You can build your product in your country, or you can build it in our country and sell it here. And, and if you build it in another country and try to ship it here, then we're going to put a tariff on it. If you build it here and ship it here, then, then we're not going to do that. In fact, we'll make it, very conducive to a business climate free. I think that's what he's doing. I think that he is preparing our country and getting us into a position to where we don't get hit with massive hyperinflation. And some of the areas this is important in is in, medicine, drugs, which most of them are made in other countries. We found that out, even during COVID. I think it also, I think that's why we have to be energy independent. We cannot there's no way we should ever be relying on another country for energy. And energy is so important to, the economy, because everything runs off of it. And food, and I think we have to make sure that we're producing everything that we need here, for future tech as well. So developing and expanding our mining operations and looking for rare earth minerals. I think that's one of the reasons that Trump is interested in Greenland, because China has 90% right now of the world's reserve, the world's rare earth minerals that are known are in China, or they are under Chinese control, like the cobalt in Africa, which those mines are run by the Chinese. And it puts us in a very precarious position to where we could be, damaged, or they have leverage over us on that basis. So we've got to develop those things here. We need to do exploration here. We've got vast, lands in Alaska, and it's believed by many that, that Greenland is rich in rare earth minerals. So I understand what he's doing. I think he's smart also to go after Panama and try to take that, because I think that we absolutely need to control that. That is a huge, massive, basically transport area. And the fact is that Panama has violated their treaty with us, in which we gave it over to them. And they've allowed now the Chinese to control that, transport. And that's also a national security risk. So I think Trump is making the right decisions, and I hope he's able to accomplish all of the things that he's promising, because so far, dang near next to everything he's mentioned, I think is what's needed to turn things around and truly make America great again. So
I agree with that 100%. The manufacturing base to be brought back here and energy production are the two major things if we have any hope of controlling our debt. And if we can get that thing back the way he wants it to do, or wants it to be, then we have good hopes, because of increased productivity and independence, of getting this debt under control and keeping the dollar strong. Without that, with what Biden was doing, it's like you said, if Kamala Harris would have won this election, we wouldn't last 4 more years before there would be a dollar crisis, and then we'd be seeing hyperinflation.
Yep. Well, Chuck, I want to thank you for coming on the show. This has been a great conversation, and we've gotten into a lot of interesting topics, things that I wasn't even sure. I had no idea we would get into, but I'm glad that we did. I appreciate your background and your knowledge in these areas of climate change, and I think it's common sense, and but most people are buying into the lies that they're being fed by the mainstream media. And, I agree with you. I think as the World Economic Forum is largely behind this, because I think they want to create a serfdom. They want us to be, disenfranchised and have our power taken from us, so that we are basically subservient to them. That is seems to be the elite's plan.
Yeah, global fascism. That's what they want.
Yep.
That's what they want.
Well, I am. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm a man of faith, and I believe that we have our part to do, but I also believe that it doesn't hurt to ask God for His help in these matters. So,
absolutely.
I like to close my my show in prayer, so I'm going to go ahead and do that right now.
Okay.
Heavenly Father, I just thank you, Lord, for this time with Chuck, and I thank you, Lord, for the great insights that he's provided tonight. I pray, Lord, that you would help those that are watching the show right now, and who will watch it in the future, to walk away from this with greater knowledge and empowered with knowledge of how they can have an impact in reaching out to their legislators and the people that are in their spheres of influence. And Lord, I pray that you would help empower Donald Trump with everything he needs to turn this ship around and to get it moving in the right direction. Pray that you would protect him and keep him safe. And I pray for your blessing on everyone on watching the show tonight, and that you would be with them and care for their needs. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. I'm glad to share my knowledge, and so if you need anything more from me, I'll be glad to provide it. That's one of the things I like doing in retirement, is I've got all this knowledge I learned over the years, and I feel like I would want to share it with the public if it makes a difference.
Yeah, well, Chuck, on that note, where can people follow you? Are you on social media? Do you have a website?
I don't have a social media. Well, I'm on social media. You can befriend me on Meta or Facebook, but also, like I said, if you want to see the work I've done, just go to edberry.com. That's EDBERRY.com. Ed Berry's a theoretical physicist. I work with him, and he's done some wonderful things along with other scientists. There's a lot of information on that site. I would also recommend Anthony Watts's What's Up With That. A lot of good scientists have published work there. So it's out there in the serfdom, and you can find it. So those are some sites I would recommend going to really dig into this if you're interested in learning about it further.
That's great. Well, folks, you can follow me at theraisingcainshow.com. I do this show along with several others, including a talk radio show, and I also publish a Substack, although in the last couple of weeks I've been a little busy and haven't had time to put one out, but I'm going to start getting back into that next week.
Oh, one other thing that I forgot to mention too, another good site is the CO2 Coalition, CO2coalition.org. Many good scientists on there that publish work about atmospheric carbon dioxide and how beneficial it is to the planet, not harmful. It's not what the Supreme Court ruled it to be. It's like you said, plants love it. It provides plant nutrients, and it provides oxygen that we need to live off of.
We learned this in physical science back in grade
many
school.
years ago. Exactly.
So
it's
folks,
not a pollutant.
Remember, you can also follow me on social media, on your favorite social media, at Nate Cain for WV, whatever it is. I'm probably on it. And the other thing I want to mention too, you guys heard the show, or the two commercials that I played. Both those commercials, that is how I'm able to do this show and afford to be able to pay for the subscription fees. I don't make any money off of this, but it does cost money to do this. So if you guys are looking for how to get into gold and silver, there's a really great company that I started with, 7K Metals, If you go to 7kmetals/raising Cain, you can check it out. And if it's something you're interested in, what I like about it is they're definitely geared towards the average, guy. They have all the training, all of the information. And if you're like me, and I don't have time to, sit there and do all of this, figuring out how much of this I want to buy or whatever. I just like to have it on a plan so that it automatically mails me. I get a withdrawal and it mails me. I get a new silver coin or some gold bullion that comes in every month and goes into my supply. And they've got some really great materials for education on that site as well. But if you want to check it out, go to 7kmetals.com/raising Cain. And for the documentary, and this is really, something that I think you guys would find very interesting. If you go to finishthisfight.us/Cain, and like I said, 50% of the proceeds will go to help put a veteran in an exoskeleton. That's a really great cause. But you'll also get to hear my story along with several other great American patriots. God bless you all, and God bless this country. Have a good night.
Raise some Cain. You gotta raise some Cain. In the heartland where the faith runs strong, we've seen the shadows growing long. Watch those around us be deceived. Yeah, the fight is at our doors, no matter who we believe. Corruption, lawless day and night, we'll speak the truth into the light. We'll bring the battle, heed the call, watch the whole thing fall. We gotta raise some Cain, show the lies, break some chains and make things right. Feel the power, be the change, time is now. We gotta raise some Cain.